You're sitting there at 2 a.m., scrolling through your banking app for the third time this week, watching the numbers barely move, or worse, watching them drain away with each coffee purchase, each spontaneous Uber, each "I deserve this" moment that felt justified in the checkout line, but now just feels like another reason you're not where you thought you'd be by now. And here's the thing that nobody really tells you when you're in your 20s. Everyone around you is doing the exact same thing, refreshing their bank balance like it's going to magically change, like understanding the problem is somehow the same as solving it. But it's not. And that gap between knowing you should do better with money and actually doing better with money, that's basically the entire financial story of your 20s. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth in their 20s, while others wake up at 29 realizing they've spent an entire decade financially treading water. And what I've learned, both from my own mistakes and from watching hundreds of people navigate this exact phase of life, is that your 20s aren't actually about making perfect financial decisions. They're about making 5 or 6 specific moves that compound over time into something that looks a lot like financial freedom by the time you hit your 30s and 40s. The thing is, most of the financial advice aimed at 20-somethings is either completely useless, just save more, or so overwhelming that it paralyzes you into doing nothing at all. But what if I told you that there are specific, concrete moves, actual decisions you can make this month, this week, even today, that will fundamentally change your financial trajectory? Not in some vague, motivational poster kind of way, but in a real, measurable, holy shit, I actually have money saved kind of way. That's what we're going to talk about, because your 20s are either going to be the decade where you set yourself up for financial success, or the decade you look back on thinking, man, I wish someone had just told me what actually matters. The automation move that makes everything else possible. Let's start with something that sounds almost stupidly simple, but that most people in their 20s completely overlook. Automating your finances to the point where good financial behavior happens whether you're paying attention or not. And I know you've heard about automation before, but here's what makes this different, and here's why this is the foundational move that makes literally everything else on this list possible. When I was 23, I was making decent money at my first real job, and every single month I had this moment where I'd get paid, feel rich for about 36 hours, and then watch as my checking account slowly drained away until the next paycheck arrived, like some kind of financial life support. And the whole time, I genuinely believed I was being responsible because I was aware of my spending. I checked my balance regularly, I felt guilty about unnecessary purchases, I had vague intentions to save more next month, but none of that awareness translated into actual financial progress, because awareness without a system is just anxiety with extra steps. Here's the thing about your brain in your 20s. It is spectacularly bad at delayed gratification, and it's even worse at making the same smart decision over and over again without fail. You might have incredible willpower on a Tuesday morning when you're feeling motivated and listening to a personal finance podcast, but what about Friday night when you're exhausted from work and your friends want to go out and you've already made 17 small decisions that day and your willpower is basically a dead battery? That's when automation saves you from yourself. The move here is this: the day after you get paid, automatically transfer money into different accounts before you have a chance to spend it. I'm talking about setting up automatic transfers to a high-yield savings account for your emergency fund, to a Roth IRA for retirement, to a separate savings account for short-term goals, like travel or a wedding or whatever matters to you. And here's the critical part. You set these transfers up once and then you never think about them again. They just happen every single month without requiring any willpower, any decision-making, any "I'll do it later" procrastination. When you automate your savings first, you're basically giving your future self a gift by making the hard decision automatic. And then, and this is where it gets psychologically interesting, you learn to live on whatever's left. Your brain adjusts. The money that hits your checking account becomes your actual spending money, and you don't miss the money that disappeared into savings because you never really had it in the first place. It's like the financial equivalent of moving to a smaller apartment. It seems impossible until you do it, and then somehow all your stuff fits anyway. I cannot overstate how much this one move will change everything else about your financial life. Because once you're automatically saving 20% or 25% of your income without thinking about it, you've basically won the game. You're building wealth in the background while you're living your life, going to work, hanging out with friends, scrolling through social media, whatever. The money is just accumulating, compounding, growing, and you didn't have to make a single additional decision to make it happen. The career investment that pays compound interest on your income. Okay, so this next one is going to sound less like financial advice and more like career advice. But honestly, in your 20s, these things are completely intertwined. The biggest financial move you can make in your 20s isn't about saving money. It's about increasing your income. And specifically, it's about investing in skills and relationships that make you more valuable in the marketplace. Here's something that took me way too long to understand. A 10% increase in your income has a bigger impact on your wealth building than a 10% increase in your savings rate, especially when you're young and your income is still relatively low. If you're making $50,000 a year and you save an extra 10%, that's $5,000 a year going into savings, which is great. But if you increase your income by 10%, if you get a raise or switch jobs or develop a side income stream, that's an extra $5,000 that you can save and an extra $5,000 that raises your baseline income forever. It compounds differently. It scales differently. But here's where most people get this wrong. They think investing in your career means just working harder at your current job, putting in more hours, being the first one in and the last one out. And sure, sometimes that helps, but what actually moves the needle is becoming the kind of person who solves valuable problems and builds relationships with people who can open doors for you. In your 20s, you want to be obsessive about learning high-leverage skills. And I don't just mean technical skills, although those matter. I mean the skills that make you irreplaceable: communication, negotiation, understanding how businesses actually make money, and being able to see around corners and anticipate problems before they happen. These are the skills that turn you from someone who executes tasks into someone who creates value. And that difference is worth tens of thousands of dollars a year in income. And relationships. God, the relationship piece is so underrated. Your network in your 20s will determine so many of the opportunities available to you in your 30s and 40s, not in some sleazy networking event kind of way, but in a genuine, I know someone who's building something cool and they need someone with your skills kind of way. The people you work with, learn from, grab coffee with, collaborate with, they're basically equity in your future career, and you want to be accumulating that equity as aggressively as you're accumulating money in your savings account. I know this might sound abstract compared to save 20% of your income, but think about it this way. If you make $50,000 at 25 and you never invest in increasing your skills or building relationships, you might be making $70,000 by 35 through normal cost of living raises. But if you're strategic about learning valuable skills and building a network, you could be making $100,000 or $120,000 by 35. That difference, that $30,000 to $50,000 a year, is life-changing money. That's the difference between feeling financially stressed and feeling financially comfortable, and it all comes down to whether you treated your 20s as a decade to coast or a decade to invest in becoming more valuable. The retirement move that feels impossible but isn't. All right, let's talk about retirement, because I know the moment I say that word, half of you just mentally checked out. Retirement feels laughably distant when you're 24 and trying to figure out how to afford rent and student loan payments and occasionally eating food that didn't come from a drive-through window. But here's the thing, and I mean this in the most practical, non-preachy way possible. Investing for retirement in your 20s is the closest thing to a financial cheat code that exists in real life. The math is almost absurd. Because of compound interest, $1 you invest at 25 is worth so much more than $1 you invest at 35 or 45. It's basically a different category of money. Let's say you invest $5,000 a year from age 25 to 35, and then you stop completely, just 10 years of contributions. If that money grows at an average of 8% per year, by the time you're 65, you'll have around $787,000. But if you wait until you're 35 to start investing the same $5,000 a year, and you do it for 30 years straight until you're 65, you'll end up with only around $611,000. You invested 3 times as as much money but ended up with less because you missed out on those 10 critical years in your 20s. That's the power of time in the market, and it's why the single best financial move you can make in your 20s is to start contributing to a retirement account, ideally a Roth IRA, which grows tax-free and can be withdrawn tax-free in retirement, even if the amount feels pathetically small. Even if it's just $100 a month, even if it feels like you're sacrificing your present self for some abstract future you that you can't quite imagine yet. Because here's the psychological shift that makes this actually possible. You have to stop thinking of retirement investing as something you do after you've handled all your other financial obligations. It's not the cherry on top of your financial sundae, it's the foundation. It's the non-negotiable thing you do first, automatically, remember that automation thing from earlier, before you've had a chance to spend that money on literally anything else. And honestly, I'll be honest with you, when I started contributing to my Roth IRA at 24, it felt completely ridiculous. I was putting away money I could barely afford